The whiskey burned going down, but Catherine Bennett barely noticed, too focused on the laughter erupting from the corner table where three ranch hands were making a show of her size. It was September 1883 in Casa Grande, Arizona Territory, and she had grown accustomed to being the subject of cruel jokes, but tonight the mockery stung deeper than usual. "Bet she could wrestle a steer to the ground without breaking a sweat," one of them called out loud enough for the entire saloon to hear. "More woman than any of us could handle," another added, and the table erupted in laughter again. Catherine stood 5 feet 10 inches tall with broad shoulders and strong arms that had helped her family survive after her father died 3 years ago. She was 22 years old and had spent those years working alongside men, doing whatever labor was necessary to keep food on the table for her mother and younger brother. Her size had been an advantage when hauling water, mending fences, and loading supply wagons, but in social situations, it made her feel like a circus attraction. She set down her glass and turned to leave the saloon, her cheeks burning with humiliation. The September heat was oppressive even as evening approached, and she stepped out onto the dusty street, grateful for the relative quiet. Casa Grande was a small town, barely more than a handful of buildings clustered around the main road, with the desert stretching endlessly in all directions. The setting sun painted the sky in shades of orange and purple, and Catherine took a deep breath, trying to calm the storm of emotions churning inside her. "Do not let them get to you." The voice came from her left, deep and gentle. Catherine turned to see a man leaning against the hitching post, his hat pulled low over his eyes. He straightened up and stepped into the fading light, and she could see he was tall, maybe even taller than her, with broad shoulders and a lean, muscular build. His face was weathered from years under the sun, but his eyes were kind, a warm brown that seemed to hold genuine concern. "Easy for you to say," Catherine replied, her voice sharper than she intended. "You are not the one they mock." The man walked closer, and she could see the dust on his boots, the worn leather of his vest, the way his hands hung relaxed at his sides. "Name is Henry Kelton," he said. "Just rode in from Tucson. I am looking for work, but I could not help overhearing those fools inside." "Well, congratulations. You witnessed my latest humiliation. Now, if you will excuse me, I need to get home." Catherine started to walk away, but Henry's next words stopped her in her tracks. "They are wrong, about you." She turned back, suspicious. "What would you know about it?" Henry met her gaze steadily. "I know that a woman who works hard enough to earn calluses on her hands is worth 10 of those lazy drunks in there. I know that strength is nothing to be ashamed of. And I know that sometimes the best things come in unexpected packages." Catherine felt something shift inside her chest, a small crack in the armor she had built around her heart. "You do not even know me. Then maybe you could tell me about yourself, over dinner if you are willing. The boarding house serves a decent meal, or so I heard." She studied him carefully, looking for any sign of mockery or cruel intention, but found none. His expression was open, almost hopeful, and there was something about the way he stood there, patient and undemanding, that made her want to say yes. "Why?" she asked. "Why would you want to have dinner with someone like me?" Henry smiled, and it transformed his entire face, making him look younger and more approachable. "Because something tells me you have interesting stories to tell. Because I have been riding alone for 3 weeks and could use some good conversation. And because I think you deserve better than the treatment you got in there." Catherine found herself nodding before she could think better of it. "All right. Dinner. But I need to stop by home first. Let my mother know I will be late. I will walk with you if that is all right." They fell into step together, heading down the dusty street toward the small house Catherine shared with her family on the edge of town. Henry's horse, a sturdy roan gelding, followed behind them without needing to be led. "So what brings you to Casa Grande?" Catherine asked, surprised at how easy it felt to talk to this stranger. "Work, mostly. I have been drifting since I left Texas 2 years ago. Worked ranches in New Mexico, did some mining in Colorado, but nothing felt right. Heard there might be opportunities here, ranches looking for hands. There are a few. The biggest is the Morrison Ranch, about 10 miles north. They are always hiring, though the pay is not great. What about you?" "You work one of the ranches." Catherine shook her head. "I do odd jobs around town. Help with heavy lifting, repairs, whatever people need. My father used to run the livery stable, but when he died, the new owner did not want to keep us on. My mother takes in sewing, and my brother Daniel works at the general store when they need him." "How old is Daniel?" 16. "Good kid, but small for his age. He gets picked on too, but for the opposite reason." They reached the house, a modest adobe structure with a small garden out front where Catherine's mother grew vegetables. Catherine excused herself and went inside, finding her mother, Margaret, mending a shirt by lamplight. "Mama, I am going to have dinner at the boarding house. I will be back in a few hours." Margaret looked up, her eyes tired but sharp. "With whom?" "A man named Henry Kelton. He just arrived in town." Her mother set down her sewing and studied Catherine's face. "Do you trust him?" "I think so. He seems kind." Margaret nodded slowly. "Be careful. And be home before it gets too late." Catherine changed into her one good dress, a simple blue cotton garment that her mother had made for her 2 years ago. It was a bit tight across the shoulders, but it was clean and presentable. She brushed her dark brown hair and pulled it back with a ribbon, then stepped outside to find Henry waiting patiently, his hat in his hands. His eyes widened slightly when he saw her, and Catherine felt a flutter of nervousness in her stomach. "You look lovely," Henry said simply, and the sincerity in his voice made her believe him. They walked to the boarding house, which also served as the town's only restaurant. Mrs. Chen, a Chinese woman who had come to Arizona with her late husband during the railroad construction boom, ran the establishment with brisk efficiency. She showed them to a small table by the window and brought them bowls of hearty beef stew with fresh bread. "So tell me," Henry said as they ate, "what is it like growing up here?" Catherine thought about how to answer. "Casa Grande is not much to look at, but it is home. It was harder after my father died. He was well respected and people helped us at first, but charity only goes so far. I had to prove I could work as hard as any man, which meant developing muscles that most women do not have. That made me different, and people around here do not like different." "I understand that," Henry said quietly. "I grew up different too. My family were Quakers, pacifists in Texas. You can imagine how well that went over. My father refused to carry a gun, refused to fight even when provoked. Some folks respected his principles, but most thought he was a coward. I loved him, but I could not follow his path completely. When I turned 18, I left home to make my own way." "Do you still see your family?" A shadow crossed Henry's face. "My parents died of fever 4 years ago. I have a sister in St. Louis, but we have not spoken in a while. I send her letters, but she rarely writes back. I think she blames me for not being there when they got sick." Catherine reached across the table and touched his hand briefly. "I am sure she does not blame you. Grief makes people act in strange ways." They talked through the meal and long after, sharing stories and dreams. Henry told her about the places he had seen, the wide open spaces of New Mexico, the mining camps of Colorado where fortunes were made and lost overnight. Catherine described her childhood, riding horses with her father, learning to read from her mother, the simple joys of life in a small desert town. When they finally left the boarding house, The sky was dark and filled with stars that seemed impossibly bright in the clear desert air. Henry walked Catherine home, and they stood outside her house for a long moment, neither wanting the evening to end. "Can I see you again?" Henry asked. "I would like that. Tomorrow, maybe I could help you with your work, whatever you have planned." Catherine smiled. "You might regret that offer. I am supposed to help Mr. Peterson build a new chicken coop. I have built worse things." "What time?" "Dawn." Henry nodded. "I will be here." He tipped his hat and walked back toward the boarding house where he had rented a room, and Catherine went inside, her heart feeling lighter than it had in months. Her mother was still awake, working by lamplight. "You seem happy." "He is different, Mama. He sees me differently." Margaret smiled. "Good. You deserve someone who sees you for who you really are." Catherine lay in bed that night, unable to sleep, replaying the evening in her mind. She kept coming back to the way Henry had looked at her, not with the uncomfortable mixture of fear and fascination that most men showed, but with genuine interest and respect. It felt too good to be true, and part of her waited for the other shoe to drop, for him to reveal himself as just another man looking for entertainment at her expense. But when dawn came and she stepped outside, Henry was already there, leaning against the fence with 2 cups of coffee from the boarding house. "Good morning," he said, handing her one of the cups. "I hope you like it strong." "The stronger the better," Catherine replied, accepting the cup gratefully. They walked together to Mr. Peterson's property at the edge of town. The old man was waiting with a pile of lumber and a hand-drawn plan for the coop. "Who is this?" Mr. Peterson asked, eyeing Henry suspiciously. "Henry Kelton, sir. I am helping Miss Bennett today." "I only pay for 1 worker. I am not asking for pay," Henry said easily. "Just helping a friend." They worked through the morning, measuring and cutting lumber, digging post holes in the hard desert soil. Henry worked with quiet efficiency, and Catherine found herself impressed by his skill with hammer and saw. They fell into an easy rhythm, anticipating each other's movements, communicating with looks and gestures as much as words. By noon, they had the basic frame up, and Mr. Peterson brought them water and cornbread for lunch. "You work well together," the old man observed. "Like you have been doing this for years." Catherine and Henry exchanged a glance, and she felt a warmth spread through her chest. They finished the coop by late afternoon, and Mr. Peterson paid Catherine her usual rate, then surprised them both by pressing an extra $1 into Henry's hand. "For good work," he said gruffly. As they walked back toward town, Henry turned the $1 over in his fingers thoughtfully. "I think I know what I want to do with this." "What is that?" "Buy you dinner. A real dinner, not just stew at the boarding house. Mrs. Chen told me that on Saturday nights she makes special dishes, her family's recipes from China. Would you like to go with me?" Today was Wednesday, which meant Catherine had 3 days to think about this, 3 days to worry and hope and wonder if this was really happening. "Yes," she said. "I would like that very much." The next few days passed in a blur of work and anticipation. Henry found employment at the Morrison Ranch, working cattle and mending fences, but he made time every evening to walk with Catherine, talking and getting to know each other better. She learned that he loved reading, that he carried a battered copy of Shakespeare's sonnets in his saddlebag, that he had a beautiful singing voice that he was shy about using. He learned that she had a sharp wit and a deep well of kindness, that she dreamed of one day owning her own ranch, that she missed her father with an ache that had not lessened with time. Saturday evening arrived, and Catherine dressed with care in her blue dress again, wishing she had something fancier. But when Henry arrived to collect her, his eyes lit up in a way that made her feel like the most beautiful woman in the world. "Mrs. Chen had prepared a feast of dishes Catherine had never tasted before, flavors both strange and wonderful. Henry told stories that made her laugh until her sides ached, and she found herself relaxing in a way she never had around anyone outside her family. "Can I tell you something?" Henry said as they finished their meal. "Of course. That first night when I saw you leave the saloon, I did not approach you because I felt sorry for you. I approached you because you were the most striking woman I had ever seen. The way you held your head high despite their mockery, the strength in your bearing, the fire in your eyes when you told me off. I knew right then that I wanted to know you better." Catherine felt tears prick at her eyes. "No one has ever said anything like that to me before." Henry reached across the table and took her hand. "Then everyone else has been a fool. Catherine, I know we have only known each other for a week, but I have never felt this way about anyone before. You are strong and kind and beautiful, and being around you makes me want to be a better man." "You are already a good man, Henry. I want to court you properly if you will let me. I want to ask your mother's permission, do things right. I know I do not have much to offer right now, just a job that pays $30 a month in a room at the boarding house, but I am a hard worker and I am not afraid of building a life from nothing." Catherine squeezed his hand, her heart so full she could barely speak. "Yes, yes, I want that too." They walked home slowly that night, hand in hand, talking about the future in tentative, hopeful terms. Henry spoke to Margaret the next day, formally asking permission to court her daughter, and to Catherine's relief, her mother gave her blessing. The months that followed were the happiest of Catherine's life. Henry proved to be everything he had seemed and more, steady and kind and thoughtful. He worked hard at the Morrison Ranch and saved every penny he could, dreaming of the day when he could afford to buy land of his own. Catherine continued her odd jobs around town, and together they began to build a small nest egg, planning for a future together. The mockery did not stop completely, but it mattered less now. When the ranch hands at the saloon made their crude jokes, Henry was there to slip his arm around Catherine's waist and look at her with such open adoration that the words seemed to bounce off an invisible shield. When Mrs. Thompson at the general store made a snide comment about finding a dress in Catherine's size, Henry responded by saying that Catherine's size was just right for his arms, and he would not change a single thing about her. Those words became a touchstone for Catherine, something she repeated to herself on hard days when the old insecurities crept back in. She was just right for Henry's arms, and he was just right for her heart. Winter came to the Arizona desert, bringing cold nights and occasional frost. On Christmas Eve, Henry took Catherine for a walk out into the desert, away from the lights of town. They stood under a sky full of stars, and Henry pulled a small box from his pocket. "I know it is not much," he said, opening the box to reveal a simple gold band. "But I have been saving for this since the day I met you. Catherine Bennett, will you marry me? Will you build a life with me, chase dreams with me, grow old with me?" Catherine did not trust herself to speak, so she just nodded, tears streaming down her face. Henry slipped the ring onto her finger, and then he kissed her for the first time, soft and sweet and full of promise. They were married in February of 1884 at the small church in Casa Grande, with Margaret and Daniel in attendance, along with Mr. Peterson and Mrs. Chen, and a handful of other townspeople who had come to see Catherine as more than just the subject of their gossip. Henry wore a new suit that he had saved for months to buy, and Catherine wore a white dress that her mother had sewn with meticulous care, letting out seams and adding fabric until it fit her tall frame perfectly. The ranch hands from the saloon were not invited, but Catherine did not care. She had Henry, and he looked at her like she was the only woman in the world. They moved into a small house on the edge of town. Just 2 rooms, but it was theirs. Henry continued working at the Morrison Ranch, and Catherine kept taking odd jobs, and together they saved and planned and dreamed. They talked about buying land, raising cattle and horses, building something that would last. Life was not without its challenges. There were droughts that made every drop of water precious. There were days when work was scarce and money was tight. There were nights when Catherine still heard the echoes of old mockery and wondered if she deserved the happiness she had found. But Henry was always there, solid and steadfast, reminding her of her worth with every word and gesture. In the spring of 1885, Catherine discovered she was pregnant. The news filled her with a mixture of joy and terror. She was 24 now, and the thought of bringing a child into the world both thrilled and frightened her. What if she was too big, too strong, too different to be a good mother? What if her child inherited her size and faced the same mockery she had endured? Henry held her as she voiced these fears, stroking her hair and murmuring reassurances. Our child will be loved and wanted, and that is what matters most. And if our child is big like you, then they will be strong and capable, and we will teach them to be proud of who they are. Margaret was overjoyed at the prospect of becoming a grandmother, and she helped Catherine prepare for the baby's arrival, sewing tiny clothes and sharing wisdom from her own experiences as a mother. Daniel, now 17 and working full-time at the general store, seemed bemused by the whole thing but promised to be the best uncle he could be. The summer was brutal, with temperatures soaring above 100 degrees most days. Catherine's pregnancy was uncomfortable in the heat, but she continued working as much as she could, driven by the need to save money for the baby. Henry worried about her, but he knew better than to try to stop her. Instead, he made sure she had plenty of water, that she rested in the shade during the hottest parts of the day, that she never pushed herself too hard. In October, their son was born, a healthy baby boy with a shock of dark hair and his father's brown eyes. They named him James Henry Kelton, and Henry cried when he held his son for the first time, overcome with the enormity of the love he felt. Catherine took to motherhood with the same determination she brought to everything else. She was gentle with James, despite her size and strength, cradling him with infinite care. Henry marveled at how natural she seemed with their son, how she seemed to instinctively know what he needed. But the demands of a new baby made it clear that they needed more than what they were earning with odd jobs and ranch work. Henry began to look more seriously at buying land, at making his dream of owning a ranch a reality. He talked to Mr. Morrison about it, and the rancher mentioned that there was a parcel of land about 15 miles north that was available for a reasonable price, 200 acres with a natural spring and decent grazing. It would take every penny they had saved, plus a loan from the bank, but it was possible. Henry came home one evening with the news, and he and Catherine stayed up late into the night, discussing the risks and rewards, weighing their options. "It is a gamble," Henry admitted. "We could lose everything if we have a bad year or if something goes wrong. But I think we can make it work. I know ranching, and you are one of the hardest workers I have ever met. Together, I think we can build something real." Catherine looked down at James, sleeping peacefully in his cradle. "I want him to grow up with space to run, with opportunities that I did not have. I want him to see that hard work and determination can make dreams come true." "Is that a yes?" Catherine smiled. "That is a yes." They bought the land in December of 1885, and by the spring of 1886, they had built a small house and a barn, fenced pastures, and purchased a small herd of cattle and half a dozen horses. It was back-breaking work, and there were days when Catherine wondered if they had made a terrible mistake. But slowly, steadily, the ranch began to take shape. Henry proved to be an excellent rancher, with an eye for good cattle and a gentle hand with horses. Catherine worked beside him, doing work that would have broken most women, but that seemed to come naturally to her. They hired a ranch hand, a young man named Tom who was willing to work hard for low pay in exchange for learning the trade. Margaret and Daniel visited often, and Margaret delighted in taking care of James while Henry and Catherine worked. The little boy grew strong and healthy, laughing easily and showing signs of his mother's sturdy build and his father's gentle temperament. The mockery that had once defined Catherine's life seemed like a distant memory now. Out here on the ranch, her size and strength were assets, not liabilities. She could lift hay bales that Tom struggled with, could wrestle a stubborn calf to the ground when needed, could ride for hours without tiring. Henry never failed to tell her how much he appreciated her, how grateful he was to have a partner who could work beside him as an equal. In the fall of 1887, their daughter was born, a tiny thing they named Sarah Margaret Kelton after both her grandmothers. She was delicate and small, the opposite of her mother in every way, and Catherine felt an almost painful tenderness toward this fragile little creature. Henry loved watching Catherine with their daughter, seeing the gentleness that had always been there but now had a chance to shine. The ranch continued to grow and prosper. They added more cattle, bred horses that were in high demand for their steady temperaments, and slowly began to make a name for themselves in the area. The Kelton Ranch became known as a place of integrity, where people could get a fair deal and honest work. In 1889, Margaret fell ill with pneumonia. Despite Catherine's best efforts to nurse her back to health, she passed away peacefully in her sleep, with Catherine and Daniel at her bedside. The loss hit Catherine hard, and she spent weeks moving through life in a fog of grief. But Henry was there, holding her when she cried, taking over her work when she could not face it, reminding her that her mother had lived to see her daughter happy and successful, which was all any parent could hope for. Daniel came to live at the ranch after Margaret's death, unable to face the empty house in town. He proved to be a skilled hand with the horses, and he and Tom became good friends. Catherine was grateful to have her brother close, to maintain that connection to her past, even as she built her future. The 1890s brought new challenges and opportunities. A railroad spur was built that passed within 10 miles of their ranch, making it easier to transport cattle to market. They expanded their operations, hiring more hands and buying adjacent land when it became available. By 1895, the Kelton Ranch was one of the most successful operations in the territory, spanning over 1,000 acres with hundreds of head of cattle and a thriving horse breeding program. James grew into a sturdy boy who loved working alongside his father, learning everything he could about ranching. Sarah was quieter, more interested in books and drawing, and Catherine encouraged her interests, buying her pencils and paper whenever they went to town. They had another child in 1892, a son they named William, who had his mother's height even as a toddler and seemed destined to be the biggest of all of them. Life was not always easy. There were droughts that tested their water resources. There were harsh winters that killed livestock. There were market crashes that made cattle prices plummet. But through it all, Henry and Catherine faced challenges together, their partnership only growing stronger with time. On their 10th wedding anniversary in 1894, Henry took Catherine to the same spot in the desert where he had proposed. They stood under the stars, just as they had all those years ago, and Henry took both her hands in his. "You remember what I said the first night we met?" he asked. Catherine smiled. "You said I was just right for your arms." "I was wrong about that." Catherine's smile faltered, but Henry squeezed her hands gently. You are not just right for my arms. You are just right for my life, for my heart, for my soul. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Henry Kelton, and I thank God every day that I was in Casa Grande that September night. Catherine kissed him then, under the vast desert sky, and felt the same flutter of joy she had felt when he first held her hand. The children grew, the ranch prospered, and the years rolled by with a swiftness that sometimes took Catherine's breath away. James married a sweet girl from Tucson in 1905 when he was 20, and they built a house on the far edge of the ranch property. Sarah went to Teachers College in Phoenix and came back to start a school in Casa Grande, much to Catherine's pride. William showed every sign of following in his father's footsteps as a rancher, with a particular gift for training horses. In 1908, Catherine and Henry became grandparents when James and his wife had a daughter. Holding that tiny baby in her arms, Catherine thought about the journey that had brought her here, from a mocked young woman in a saloon to a successful rancher, wife, mother, and now grandmother. It seemed impossible that this was her life, that she had been blessed with so much. Henry was in his 50s now, his dark hair streaked with silver, lines deepening around his eyes. But when he looked at Catherine, she still saw the same warmth and love that had been there from the beginning. Age had been kind to both of them, keeping them strong and active even as the years accumulated. Daniel married late, at 35, to a widow with 2 children who had come to Casa Grande to start over. Catherine was thrilled to see her brother find happiness, and she welcomed his new family with open arms. Tom, their first ranch hand, had become like a son to them, and eventually bought his own small spread nearby with their help and guidance. The Arizona Territory became a state in 1912, and Catherine and Henry celebrated by hosting a huge party at the ranch, inviting everyone from Casa Grande and the surrounding area. It was a far cry from the early days when Catherine had been the subject of mockery and scorn. Now she was respected, admired, a pillar of the community who had built something lasting and good. As they stood on their porch that evening, watching the sun set over land they had tamed and nurtured, Henry slipped his arm around Catherine's waist. "You ever regret it?" he asked. "Choosing this life, choosing me." Catherine leaned into him, marveling that after nearly 30 years of marriage, his presence still brought her such comfort and joy. "Not for a single second. You gave me everything I did not dare dream of, Henry. You saw me when everyone else saw only someone to mock. You loved me when I did not know how to love myself. You made it easy to love you, Catherine. You always have." They stayed there until the stars came out, holding each other and reflecting on the life they had built. It had not been without struggles, without moments of doubt and fear and pain. But it had been rich and full and deeply meaningful, a testament to what 2 people could create when they truly saw and valued each other. In 1915, they celebrated their 31st wedding anniversary with all 3 children, their spouses, and 6 grandchildren gathered around the big table that Henry had built when they first moved to the ranch. Looking at the faces of the family they had created, Catherine felt a profound sense of gratitude and accomplishment. James now ran much of the day-to-day operations of the ranch, allowing Henry and Catherine to slow down a bit, though neither of them was ready to fully retire. Sarah's school had grown to serve over 50 children from the area, and she had married a kind man who taught alongside her. William had married a rancher's daughter from a neighboring spread, uniting 2 of the most successful operations in the region. Catherine's size, once a source of shame and mockery, had become part of her legacy. Her children and grandchildren knew the stories of how she had worked harder than any man, how she had built a ranch from nothing, how she had overcome prejudice and cruelty to create a life of meaning and purpose. They saw her strength not as something strange or shameful, but as a gift that had shaped their family's success. As the years continued to pass, Henry and Catherine settled into a comfortable rhythm. They spent their mornings on the porch with coffee, watching the sun rise over the land they loved. They took long rides together, exploring corners of the ranch they had not visited in years. They read to each other in the evenings, sharing books and talking about everything and nothing. In the summer of 1920, Casa Grande held a celebration for its 50th anniversary as an incorporated town. Catherine and Henry were honored as pioneers who had helped build the community, and Catherine was asked to speak about her experiences. She stood before the gathered crowd, now a woman in her late 50s with silver threading through her brown hair, and she spoke with confidence and grace. "When I first came to this town as a young woman, I was different in ways that made people uncomfortable. I was bigger and stronger than most women, and that made me a target for mockery. I will not pretend those years were easy, because they were not. But they taught me resilience, and they prepared me to recognize real kindness when it finally came." She looked at Henry, sitting in the front row with their children and grandchildren surrounding him. "A wise and gentle man once told me that I was just right for his arms, and in doing so, he changed my life. He saw value where others saw only difference. He saw beauty where others saw only deviation from the norm. And he loved me, not despite who I was, but because of who I was." There was not a dry eye in the crowd as Catherine continued, her voice steady and strong. "I want to tell anyone who feels different, anyone who has been mocked or belittled or made to feel less than, that your difference might be your greatest strength. It might be the very thing that allows you to build something extraordinary. But you need to find people who see you clearly, who value you rightly, who love you completely. Those people are out there, and they are worth waiting for." The crowd erupted in applause, and Catherine stepped down from the platform into Henry's waiting arms. He held her close, whispering in her ear, "I am so proud of you. I have always been proud of you." The 1920s brought prosperity to the ranch and to the family. The demand for beef and horses remained strong, and the Kelton Ranch continued to thrive under James's capable management. Catherine and Henry became the wise elders of the family, dispensing advice and support to their children and grandchildren, watching with satisfaction as the next generation carried forward the values and work ethic they had instilled. In 1923, they threw a huge celebration for their 40th wedding anniversary. The entire extended family gathered, along with friends and neighbors from across the region. There was dancing and food and laughter, stories shared and memories relived. Catherine danced with Henry under the stars, just as they had at their wedding 4 decades earlier, and she marveled that her heart still fluttered when he pulled her close. As the 1920s progressed, they watched their grandchildren grow into young adults, choosing their own paths and making their own way in the world. Some stayed on the ranch, continuing the family business. Others pursued education, or moved to cities for opportunities that had not existed in Catherine's youth. But all of them carried with them the lessons they had learned from their grandparents about hard work, integrity, and the importance of seeing and valuing people for who they truly were. In the winter of 1928, Henry fell ill with a fever that worried Catherine terribly. She nursed him with the same fierce determination she had brought to every challenge in her life, and to her immense relief, he recovered. But the illness left him weaker than before, and they both recognized that they were getting older, that their time was finite and precious. They began to talk more explicitly about legacy, about what they wanted to leave behind. The ranch would go to James, that had always been clear, But they made sure that Sarah and William were provided for as well, that all their children would have security. They updated their will, made their wishes known, had conversations that were sometimes difficult but always important. But mostly, they focused on enjoying the time they had left. They took trips to see places they had always talked about visiting, traveling to California to see the ocean, visiting Sarah's daughter at university in Tucson, taking a train to St. Louis to finally meet Henry's sister after decades of estrangement. The reunion with his sister was emotional and healing, and Catherine was grateful that Henry got to experience that reconciliation. As they entered the 1930s, the Depression brought hardship to many, but the ranch was stable enough to weather the storm. They took in families who had lost everything, providing work and shelter when they could. Catherine remembered what it felt like to struggle, to wonder where the next meal would come from, and she made sure that no one who came to their door left empty-handed. In 1934, they celebrated their 50th wedding anniversary, a golden milestone that seemed almost miraculous. They were both in their 70s now, slowed by age but still sharp and engaged with life. The celebration was quieter than previous anniversaries, just family gathered around them, but it was no less meaningful. Henry stood to make a toast, his voice a bit rougher than it had been but still steady. 50 years ago, I married the most remarkable woman I have ever known. She has been my partner, my best friend, my greatest adventure. Every day with her has been a gift, and I thank God for every single one of them. Here is to Catherine, the woman who was always just right for these arms. He held up his arms as he said it, and Catherine stood and walked into his embrace, amid the cheers and applause of their family. They held each other close, and Catherine whispered, "And you were always just right for my heart." The years that followed were peaceful and full. They spent their days surrounded by family, watching great-grandchildren play in the yard, sharing stories of the old days, imparting wisdom gained from a lifetime of experience. The ranch continued to thrive, now run primarily by James and William working in partnership, incorporating new techniques and technologies while maintaining the core values that Henry and Catherine had established. In the spring of 1938, Catherine and Henry took one last ride together to their favorite spot in the desert, the place where he had proposed so many years ago. They sat together under the vast sky, holding hands and remembering all the moments that had brought them to this place. "Have I told you lately that I love you?" Henry asked. "Only about 1,000 times this week," Catherine replied with a smile, "but I never get tired of hearing it. I love you, Henry Kelton. You made my life an adventure and a joy. And I love you, Henry Kelton. You saved me from a life of loneliness and gave me everything I never dared to dream of." They sat in comfortable silence as the sun began to set, painting the sky in brilliant colors. Catherine thought about the scared young woman she had been, mocked and belittled, convinced that she would never find love or acceptance. She thought about the gentle cowboy who had seen past her exterior to the person she really was. She thought about the life they had built, the family they had created, the love that had only deepened with time. As they rode back to the ranch together, Catherine felt a profound sense of peace and gratitude. Whatever time they had left, whether it was days or years, she knew she had lived a life rich in love and purpose. She had been just right for Henry's arms, and he had been just right for everything she needed. They lived several more years, enjoying their family and watching their legacy grow and flourish. When Henry finally passed away peacefully in his sleep in the fall of 1942, at the age of 81, Catherine held his hand and whispered all the words of love she had said 1,000 times before. making sure he left this world knowing how deeply he was cherished. She mourned him profoundly, but without bitterness. They had been blessed with nearly 6 decades together, with children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren who carried forward their values and love. She had been loved completely by a man who saw her clearly and valued her rightly. And that was more than many people ever got. Catherine lived another 3 years, spending her final days surrounded by family, telling stories and sharing memories. She talked about the mockery she had endured as a young woman, not with pain but as a testament to how far she had come. She talked about Henry with love and longing, counting down the days until she would see him again. When she passed away peacefully in the summer of 1945, at the age of 84, her family mourned the loss of their matriarch, but celebrated the incredible life she had lived. They buried her next to Henry on a hill overlooking the ranch they had built together, with a headstone that read simply, "Catherine Kelton, beloved wife, mother, grandmother, and friend. She was just right." The ranch continued to thrive for generations after them, with James's children and grandchildren carrying it forward into the modern era. The story of Catherine and Henry became part of family lore, told and retold to each new generation. It was a story about seeing beyond surface differences, about choosing love over prejudice, about building something lasting and good through hard work and partnership. In Casa Grande, which had grown from a small desert town into a proper city, there were still people who remembered Catherine Bennett Kelton, the woman who had overcome mockery and hardship to become one of the most respected figures in the community. Her legacy lived on not just in the successful ranch that still bore the Kelton name, but in the example she had set of strength, determination, resilience, and grace. And somewhere, in whatever comes after this life, 2 souls who had been just right for each other walked hand in hand under endless stars, their love continuing beyond the boundaries of time and space, eternal and unbreakable, a testament to the transformative power of seeing and being seen, of loving and being loved exactly as you are.